Hi, and welcome to Girls Lunch, your mealtime companion, where we talk about food, gender, sexuality, and where everyone is welcome.
I'm Julia Andreas.
I'm Nicole Hilton.
And this is our What's Our Deal episode, where we're going to tell you about who we are, what we do, and why we're here in your ear holes as you listen to this podcast.
And maybe before we, talk about how did we get to our audience's ear holes, let's talk about each other's ear holes.
I do love your ear holes. I regret saying that instantly.
This is something I always wonder about with podcast hosts is like, how do they know each other?
How do they know each other?
Yeah.
Give me the gossip.
Yeah.
I want the gossip.
Well, the gossip is that we are friends.
Best friends.
Best friends. We met in college. We lived together in college. We were roommates.
Oh my god, they were roommates.
Gotta get that in there.
Gotta get that in there. If you can't tell, we're old.
Yeah. We met in college almost a decade ago, which is weird and gross. But since we were both English majors, we took a lot of classes together, spent a lot of time together, to the point where we worried that our professors probably thought that we didn't have other friends.
I think they might have also thought we were dating.
Also possible.
I think it was either one. It was either they have no other friends or they're dating. Who's to say?
Who's to say? So the chemistry for a good podcast has, if you will pardon the pun, perhaps been baked in for a long time.
That's a good pun.
And, I mean, while we were in college, so we were living together, so we would cook together a lot, bake together a lot. We had so much fun doing that.
So much fun.
Yeah, and it was actually in college that we came up with the idea of the food fact of the day, which is going to be a recurring segment on Girls Lunch as our kind of intermission. Julia and I would just, through osmosis or through all of the things that we were already reading and interested in reading, we would come across these like random, facts about food that we would just share with each other whenever we saw each other next. We graduated, we got old, we sort of did our own things for a while, and then we worked together for, 3 years?
Yeah, like 3 years, I think, in the tech industry, which I would not have survived if it wasn't for Nicole.
Yeah.
Just with all of the shenanigans that happen in tech startups. So
yeah.
Definitely some of the most fun years of my working career where...
It's fun to be able to work with your best friend every day.
It's so fun to be able to work with your best friend every day. And that's where the title of the podcast, Girls Lunch, comes from. Because we would often have lunch together at the office. Rest in peace, Maplelawn.
Yeah, to our old office that closed during COVID.
Yeah. And we would have our own little lunch get-together. We would just sit at one of the little office tables. And for some reason, this seemed to confuse everyone. But we always called it Girls Lunch. And people were like, well, why can't I join you if I'm a man? And I'm like, no, you can. Girls Lunch is for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. Now that you say that, I remember people seem to be confused of like, you eat together?
You bring your
lunch.
And you eat it
and
together.
And you talk about like not work.
And you don't work while you eat.
Yeah. Tech startups are wacky, man.
They're wild.
Don't work there.
Don't do it.
I will. So now you know how we know each other.
Our long and turbulent history.
Turbulent. It's the opposite of turbulent.
But so, Nicole, would you like to tell the good people of the internet about you?
I want to tell the bad people of the internet about myself.
Yeah, let's tell the nasty people of the internet.
You nasties.
You nasties.
Okay, yes, so I will go into my, if we're thinking of this as a job application.
You.
Also gross. My relevant experience.
Shivers.
Yeah. I'm in the job applying process right now, and nothing is, in my opinion, more demoralizing than applying for a job.
It's like, hello, this is me.
Please give me money.
Give me money. Why do you want to work here?
Because I need to pay rent. So Julia and I met in undergrad. We had a lot of similar interests. As I said, I was an English major, but I also minored and took a lot of classes in sociology and what our college called pronounced WigSex, which is just WGSX was like the course code for it. which stands for Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, but in the college colloquials, we just called it wig sex.
It had nothing to do with wigs, but it did have to do with sex.
Yeah. So that is where we get the title for this episode, and perhaps will be mentioned in future episodes of Getting Wiggy with It.
Let's get wiggy with it.
Let's get wiggy with it. I'm talking about wig sex. Basically, we're just talking about gender and sexuality stuff. So that was me in undergrad. Just like the Republicans warned you about, a liberal education did make me a feminist. It did make me queer.
It also made you hot.
Yeah, I was brainwashed by the liberal establishment. And so, I took a lot of sociology classes because I was really interested in, like, sociological organizations. So if you don't know, sociology is like the study of society. So you look at things at like a really broad level of like big social trends. So things like race, class, gender, sexuality, even like education. In sociology, you examine those things from like a really high level. And then something that I've always been interested in doing is like, how do things at the really high macro level affect things at like the micro level, or even vice versa, right? So like, how are you, an individual, affected on the daily by racism or poverty or those types of things? I'm also interested in like, how do those things overlap, which is the concept of intersectionality, meaning that like oppression does not just happen because of racism, it also happens because of class. And like I said, these things overlap, right? Poverty does not just have one cause, or racism does not just have one cause.
Yeah, people aren't that good at compartmentalizing oppression.
Yeah, so intersectionality, which I'm sure is going to come up a lot on this podcast. This shows up in my creative work as well. So I just finished my graduate degree like a couple weeks ago.
Woo!
I just got my Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, or my MFA. I guess we just like fancy letters here in academia. It makes us feel good. So I just finished a 2-year graduate program in creative writing. I wrote a memoir, which is like a collection of essays on food and my family, which also is interested, even though I'm telling personal stories, is still interested in things like masculinity, sexuality, class, like even economics, right? So I'm excited to bring like that background to Girls' Lunch. And in my memoir, I talk a lot about my family history with food, because for me, growing up, there was this really big emphasis on food in my family. When I was a kid, my dad owned a grocery store and a restaurant. He has always been like self-employed and done lots of different things, but, grocery store and restaurant happened during my lifetime. He's been a big influence in my, thoughts on food. I love to cook as a result. I love to bake. And so I'm excited to bring like that, I guess, academic background and also like some personal background to Girls' Lunch. So Julia, tell me about your relevant experience.
Oh, God.
Why should we hire you for Girls' Lunch?
You shouldn't.
No, it's too late.
It's too late.
You have the job.
So I like to think of myself as an amateur food historian in the truest sense of the word of amateur, which is I love food. I love history. I think it's fascinating how the things we eat today got to our plates. And it's always has like a lot more twists and turns and drama than you think it would, just like the simple apple that's sitting there in like your pantry. So like Nicole mentioned, I graduated with a major in English, and I had like a sort of non-official focus in food writing. That's what I really focused on during my undergrad, and what I wrote my thesis on is similarly to Nicole, food essays, talking about history and family and how all that just intertwines into a big ol' mess on your plate.
Big spicy meatball.
A big spicy meatball. I've also given like guest lectures on food and history at our alma mater, and I've also given guest lectures on chocolate making. And so I think like maybe this is my biggest pull I can have for this podcast of like why I'm qualified. at least for chocolate, is that for a few years I worked at a bean-to-bar chocolate factory in DC, and I was involved in the chocolate making from prepping the beans all the way to packaging and marketing.
We would consider you a subject matter expert.
Yeah. Oh God. I also love this stuff. I've got pretty high standards when it comes to the good cacao bean. I love chocolate. I think it's the only flavor that should exist. Strawberry can get hecked. If it's not chocolate, it's not worth eating, in my opinion.
Dang, you heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, but that's like the food side. And where Nicole might bring, multiple degrees and an incredible intelligence, I'm going to bring childhood trauma.
Julia's going to bring realness to this podcast.
I'm going to bring the goofs and the realness. I was raised Catholic, but I am no longer practicing in any sense. And so kind of that history I have with religion and church and religious institutions is really complicated, and it really complicated my ideas of what the proper role of a woman was growing up, feminism and sexuality. I'm also a queer white lady, and I didn't even figure that out until after I really graduated from college. It's fun looking back and being like, oh no, hella queer.
Yeah. That experience. I feel like this is especially true for queer women. Not to say this isn't true for like queer men or men who like men, but like looking back and being like, oh, that was hella gay. Bud, what are you doing?
Yeah, that was hella gay. How embarrassing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I also have an extreme dairy allergy. I'm allergic to casein, which is the protein in dairy. And that kind of also complicated my relationship with food growing up because I loved it and I would get very sick from it. To kind of give you an idea of how intense it was, like I guess a little bit of a TMI warning, but
it's okay. We're going to talk about poop in the next episode.
It's true. We are going to talk about poop in the next episode, but I could not be breastfed because I was allergic to my mom's breast milk. I was allergic to cow's milk. I was also allergic to soy, so, the only option was chicken byproduct meal.
Oh.
So that's probably something we might get into in a later episode, but, yeah, I had a tumultuous tummy time growing up.
A tumultuous tummy time.
I
love that. I mean, I don't, because it's bad, and it was not fun for you, but it's a good word play.
Thank you. And so my relationship with food was pretty difficult growing up. But I think what really helps me sort of, make all of this make sense is food history. It's a really great sort of salve to soothe these burns. I really find fascinating that the food we eat today really is not some like magical or naturally occurring thing. Like everything on our grocery store shelves is there because of decisions people have made for years with either good intentions or bad intentions or capitalism. And so I think, it's comforting to me to see, like, food is not something with morals. It is people who have the morals. And so what I can and cannot eat does not define if I'm a good or bad person. And we'll probably get into a lot of this unpacking of emotional damage in later episodes, but that's why we're here.
We have plenty of room to talk about our trauma throughout our podcast.
Why else would you podcast?
Yeah.
Work through some trauma.
Yeah, man. So I think maybe next we should talk about sort of our goals for the show, what a listener can expect kind of for each episode. In creative writing, oftentimes people ask you, like, who are your influences? Or, like, what are the corollaries for your book, right? Like, when you're trying to sell your book, it's like if you're trying to sell a house, you look for comps, right? So you say, like, what's comparable to your work. So I think it's worth us talking about some of our influences for this show. We would absolutely be remiss if we did not mention this class that we took together in college, which is called Books That Cook, which is run by our mentor and mutual friend / academia mom, Jennifer Cunard Black.
Buy her book.
Buy
all of her books.
So Books That Cook, I think the subtitle is like The Making of a Literary Meal. right? So the whole class is basically about like food in literature, like the role that food plays in stories, like the stories we tell about ourselves, our and understandings of our own narratives, all that type of fun stuff. She has a book that is called Books That Cook that you can buy, and you should, because it's groundbreaking, life-changing, all of that.
And yeah, when we're talking about books that cook or food writing in general, we're not really talking about like recipe blogs or even like cookbooks. I know there is that stereotype / meme of like, I just want a chocolate chip cookie recipe, but now I have to scroll through this like 15,000 word essay
about this woman's unhappy marriage. And
yeah, and I think that could be an episode in its own right. There's a lot to unpack there, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about when we talk about food writing.
Yeah. Some other influences in terms of like other podcasts that we listen to that are sort of, models for ours would include Maintenance Phase, Sawbones, Schmanners, and on YouTube, Tasting History would be another one.
You should definitely watch these, listen to these if you like, what we're talking about and you want to hear from people who have a lot more experience in the audio format.
Yeah, perhaps a bit more polished.
But they're all fantastic. They will either brighten your day or make it upsetting, but in a lovely way.
You can just balance them out.
Yeah, balance them out.
I mean, I think our general goal for this podcast is to explore, like, food, different elements of that. There's a pretty big umbrella term. History, like food history, and bring some feminist and queer lenses to that. We are interested in what food can teach us about our history, about our culture, and even, like I said, about ourselves, right? So why do we eat what we eat? What does that say about us, our larger, like, society that we're living in, the larger, like, social implications, all that. There's a lot there.
There's a lot to unpack in this lunchbox we call life.
Whoa.
But yeah, this podcast is not about what you should and shouldn't eat. Like, we're not going to tell you.
We're not going to be telling you to do Whole30 or keto.
We're not going to tell you not to do those things if that's something that's important to you. But it's more of like an exploration of really the wacky way that food weaves itself into nearly every aspect of our lives and how these foods got here. And maybe why people wanted to put them there in the first place.
I really like what you said about,
Tumultuous Tummy Times.
Tumultuous Tummy Times, but also, like, when you go to the grocery store, like, how did this bottle of ketchup or this package of graham crackers, which we're alluding to potential future episodes.
Lemons, man. The story of lemons is wild.
Yeah. So how did that get there? Why is this something that we've decided, like, we can eat, or who tells us that, like, we should or should not eat it? Is, I think, really neat. We just have a lot of questions and a lot of feelings.
We've got a lot of feelings.
Yeah. I mean, I just wrote a memoir about this, so I have a lot of feelings, but I am excited to bring those feelings to this podcast. Because what else do you do with your feelings?
You write a memoir, you start a podcast with your best friend, and you taste test some foods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's Girls' Lunch.
And
we are, excited for you to sit down and have some lunch with us.
Yeah. Have some lunch with us. Everyone's welcome.
Yeah. So I think with that, thanks for lunching with us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Our theme music is Red Onions by Louis Zong. Please check out the rest of his album Vegetable Soul in the description. You can follow us on Twitter at Girls Lunch. Nicole is also on Twitter at NicoleH262, and her website is NicoleHilton.com. Julia is smarter than all of us and not on social media. Thank you for listening.
I wonder if you can hear the cat scratching the couch in the background. Ma'am, can we help you? Do I have to kick her out?
Maybe.
Yeah, okay, hold on. I'll be right back. Ma'am, I have to remove you from the premises.